And once the project is finally created, here's what you're going to see. It's empty. Well, almost empty. You're going to see this main camera here, and that's going to be basically the main viewpoint, what we're going to see. And we also have a directional light that lights our scene. Other than that, it's completely empty. So what I'm going to do, I am going to create a simple cube, and you can do that here. Let's create 3D empty cube, or you can do game object, 3D objects, cube. It's going to put a cube there. You can zoom in using the mouse scroll wheel if we need to. If you zoom out, whoops. Let's call this cube. But if you do press F, it will focus on that object, which is really nice. And then you see over on the right, we have this inspector thing. Inspector has a whole lot of information relating to basically all the game objects here. So it has the position in the world. We can move it here if we wanted to, or you can just grab one of these arrows. Grabbing the arrows and moving them around is great for getting them near where you want, but I tend to use the inspector to get them in the exact positions that I want. Usually nice round numbers, like 1, 1, 1. But if you want to remove all that, you can just do transform, reset. This transform here contains, it has the position, the rotation, and the scale, which is essentially all the things that relate this to its place in the world. Which sounds like a Disney song, but whatever. So it's rotation, its position, its rotation, if we wanted to. We put this at 45 or 0. And if you put your mouse right over the border here, you can sort of drag it. Well, not on a small laptop. On my PC I can. But let's put these back to 0. Or if I want to do it on screen, I can press the E button, which brings up rotation. The R button brings up scale, and the W button puts it back to rotation. Now let's rotate this around a bit. Just grab one of the axes here, and then R to scale it. And you'll notice you can see them changing on the right as I scale it and move it. Let's put that all back to 0. In fact, we don't want this at all. Let's right click and delete. What we want is a clock. So let's see if there are any objects. You can put it in a cube, we can put it in a sphere, a capsule. Capsules are nice because they can approximate humans for very, very simple games. We don't really want that, so we're just going to delete it. What we want is a cylinder. You can also use planes and quads for basically really flat things. And a cylinder is nice, and you might think that does not look like a clock. In fact, if we scaled it up on the y-axis, y in this case is up and down. And you can see that here. So if we scaled it up to 5, we get, and zoomed out, we get a really nice pole. But it works the other way too. If we scale it down to 0.1, we start getting it flatter. We scale this up 5 and this up to 5. Well, pretty soon we're getting a nice clock face. The way I'm moving up and down, I'm holding down on my middle mouse button. If I want to rotate around, I'm holding my right mouse button. And it's a little hard to get used to at first, but I've been using Unity for a while, so I just tend to do these things and forget that everyone else doesn't know what to do. So right now we're looking at a nice clock face, but if we played it, just click the giant play button up top, Well, that's not a very good view of a clock. So let's change our camera. Here's the main camera. If you zoom out a bit, rotate around, you can see exactly what it's looking at. These lines going up here, way out into the distance here. That is way too far, but more importantly, it's pointing out. We want it to be up top and pointing down. So we can drag this in here, and then maybe rotate it a bit. So E, and then rotate it down. And that's not going so well. We might just have to experiment by resetting this. Drag it up a bit, and then let's say 90. You can, when you have the camera selected, you can see down in the right-hand corner exactly what it's going to see, or we can just check the game and say, yep, well, it's a bit too high right now, so 5. That looks great. It's nice and big, fills up most of the screen. I mean, don't get me wrong, the cylinder, you can definitely see the edges. It's not quite as round as we would like, but there's not a whole lot we can do about it. If we imported an asset from, say, Blender, which had more than, I think, 20 sides, we could have it at 200 sides or 300 sides, it would look a lot smoother. But for our very first object, it's not bad. It'll do what we want. So we have this cylinder, and we can rename it if we want. That's clock face. You just click in this box, okay, clock face, and it gets automatically renamed over here. We could also right-click, rename clock faces, and it gets updated here. It's only one clock face, so we'll call it clock face. Now, one of the things about clocks is, of course, that they have hands. So, let's make a cube. That is way too big and, frankly, way too square. But you'll notice something. Despite it being a cube, it's actually pretty flat. That is because I made it a child of the clock face. So it has a scale of 1, 1, 1, but that is in reference to its parent, whose scale is 5.15. So we need to shrink this down. Say 0.1. Let's go even more. Let's go 0.01. And that is getting a little hard to see. And this is going to be our second hand as well. So if you remember way back in the old days with analog clocks, second hands tended to be red. So let's make it red. To do that, we're going to need the material. So if you right-click down here on Assets, Create, and here we can create a whole bunch of stuff. We can make a new folder, which is useful for organizing things. C# script, we'll definitely be using those in the future. 2D, a shader, those are tricky. All sorts of stuff. And material is the one that we're looking for. And let's call this second hand mat, which makes it seem like it's a material that's been used before and is now being passed down. But actually, it's the material we're going to be using on our second hand. This has a lot of different options, but right now, all we care about is albedo. Albedo we're just going to make red. And I'm flipping back and forth between the scene and the game here, because I want to see what the camera is seeing. But it's not great for grabbing objects. So in the scene view, I'm just going to drag, you can drag this onto here, the clock face, but we're not going to do that. Or we can drag it down right onto the inspector itself and it'll turn it red. Great. Now we have a viewable second hand. Oh, Let's rename this, actually, to second hand. That's not really where a second hand is. And we should probably drag it down a little bit. Maybe lower its scale as well, 0.1, so it's nice and flat. That way we can put our minute hand and our hour hand either above or below it without running into any collisions or anything like that. But what we really want to do is have it start in the middle and go to the top. So let's change it and then move it. Moving in the right direction, we're not. So 0.25. I'm just moving the scale a bit accidentally, so let's go back to our scene and lower it a bit more. Let's count 1. If we zoom in right on it, you can see it's sort of clipping through the top of the clock, so let's move it up 1.5. That way I can stick, well, 1.2. 2 works. And I can stick the minute hand at 1.7 and the hour hand at 1.5, something like that. So we're going to have a script that rotates our second hand, and it should go around once every minute, but we can speed it up or slow it down if we need to. The big problem, though, is that if I just rotate this around the y-axis, remember y is up and down, so it's going to be the axis that we want to go through. If I rotate this, that is not how a hand rotates on a clock. We're going to set it back to 0. The problem with Unity by itself is that the pivot point is generally in the middle of the object. If we imported an object from Blender, in Blender you can set the pivot point. In Unity you can't. There's a couple of ways around that, and one of them that I found is just to create an empty that has, if we look at here, we have a cube, a mesh filter, a mesh renderer, a collider. We don't really need the collider, so we can just remove this, and then a material. An empty has nothing. It has a transform, and that's it. So we're going to call this second hand holder. What I'm going to do is just drag this onto that and make second hand a child of the second hand holder. And now when I rotate this, that looks proper. It's because the pivot point of the second hand holder is right in the middle of the clock. And the second hand is actually staying stationary relative to its parent. I could drag this around as well. If I wanted to, change its position. And the second hand stays stationary. I can move also the second hand if I wanted to, but I don't. Let's just put this right back here. You can move this independently from this, the parent, but when the parent moves, any children will move with it.